Right now, a medicinal cannabis company has put the first seeds in the ground at its facility near Toowoomba, Belinda.
Cannatrek now has the first shipment of commercial medicinal cannabis seeds, and the first trial plants were planted about 2 weeks ago. The Director of Research and Compliance at Cannatrek, Rigby, had a chat to me about the progress.
I think it's taken a while for our politicians to actually act and change legislation. Obviously, changing legislation is not so straightforward, and there's definitely been a very strong push from the ground up. And I do believe it's been some of the heartbreaking stories about some of the children in Australia with epilepsy and just the incredible relief that they were getting using black market cannabis because they were absolutely desperate.
Does the industry generally still suffer from a perception issue that medical cannabis is the same as illegal cannabis?
I wouldn't say the general public does. I think you'll find, if you look at some of the figures, I believe 85% of Australians, probably more now, support cannabis for medical use in Australia. But definitely when you look at some of the regulators and politicians and some of the general public, it really just comes down to a lack of information and a lack of education. There's been so much misinformation over the past 80-odd years since Prohibition in the early 1900s.
You are working in Victoria, and of course there's now plans for Queensland as well. Are there different laws in different states that you have to, work through?
The medical cannabis industry is governed federally by the Office of Drug Control and the Therapeutic Goods Administration. The way that it can differ slightly in the states is when it comes down to our state health department. But generally, the overall industry and all of the regulations, licenses, permits, they all are governed by the federal government. We are operating in Queensland and we have just received our planning permit to build down in regional Victoria.
Obviously, you're seeing a bright future in this particular area, but it's growing fairly quickly.
It's growing very rapidly, and that's not just in Australia, that's globally. We're seeing rapid increases in the number of prescriptions in Australia that are just on the rise exponentially, and that's as, more doctors become educated on how to navigate the special access scheme pathways in order to be able to prescribe for their patients. We've really just got to make it an affordable medicine to bring people away from the black market, because in Australia and in other parts of the world where it has been prohibited, we've seen a lot of desperate patients seeking out black market cannabis because they've had no other choice. There's no safety or quality information that comes with accessing the black market, and of course it's illegal, so you don't know what you're getting, you're breaking the law, and you're risking even continuity of supply, and you don't know that you're getting a quality tested product.
From your experience in Southern Queensland, what's been the need in terms for you, jobs-wise and, indirect sort of regional supplies-wise?
A cannabis farm is not too different from growing any other horticultural crop. Obviously, the security is a lot higher, and in regards to getting your license and your permit is a lot more difficult. But generally, it's very similar to cultivating any other greenhouse crop. I guess it's the licensing at the federal level that's really the most difficult.
What about research, scientists, medical people? Have you delved into that area?
Yeah, look, I'm actually a research scientist myself. So at Cannatrek, we have a very strong focus on R&D, research and development. So our program looks at research all the way from seed through to patient. So looking at different cultivation methods, developing unique chemical varieties that will actually, be targeted towards specific medical indications. And then, of course, we're also working on clinical trials so that we can actually give the doctors, the data that they need so that they can confidently match, their patients and their medical conditions with the correct cannabis medicine.
So how is the changing weather patterns factored into that?
What the greenhouse does is it enables you to control that microclimate around the plant. So we install various technologies to help keep the temperature at the perfect level for the plants, as well as the humidity, really help to mitigate those climate extremes and the climate variation that we seem to be experiencing more and more.
Emily, you've now been given permission to grow medical cannabis at the facility in southern Queensland with that total growing area of around 3,200 metres squared. When are those plants going in?
We've put our first research trials in now. We're actually waiting to receive some more of our genetics, so obviously to get the cannabis plant sort of starting material, whether that's seeds or cuttings. Obviously, that has to come from legal sources, and that's very limited, of course, in Australia because it's a brand new industry. So we do, of course, to import medical cannabis genetics, so whether that's seeds or cuttings or tissue culture, we do need to follow, of course, all of the regulations for importing plant material, which, of course, has to have phytosanitary certificates and go through quarantine before it's released. We have received our first genetics, and they have started growing, and then we are eagerly awaiting the arrival from some of our international genetics that are coming from Europe.
So when will you use up those, 3,200 metres, if you know what I mean, plant on a larger scale?
So we will fill the full facility before Christmas. Hopefully we don't have any hiccups when it comes to receiving these genetics that are coming from overseas, but we will be in full production before Christmas.
ABC Southern Queensland. That's the latest on that, the growth of cannabis in Toowoomba. Belinda?
That's the Director of Research and Compliance at Cannatrek, Emily Rigby, speaking there. Now, I can't reveal exactly where the plants are, David, because of those security